Everyone must have been taller than me today. Let me begin by, let me go backwards. There we go. Let me begin by acknowledging the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand. I like to pay my honors and respect to the elders and the spirits of the land, and show and express my appreciation for allowing me to be a guest here on these lands. So I am Dori Tunstall. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Design at OCAD University. And I'm going to talk to you about respectful design and how that relates to digital inclusion. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Faculty of Design, just to give you, because I'm sure hopefully all of you know all about OCAD University. But I'm going to give you just a sort of quick tour because it just gives you a sense of the scope of impact that the transformation that we're trying to do around design will have. So the Faculty of Design is the largest of the three faculties that exist at OCAD University. It consists of 6.5 undergraduate programs. The 0.5 is that digital futures is shared between the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences and the Faculty of Design. You can see from the numbers of the 735 graphic design students, 481 illustration students, 427 environmental design students. You can see we have a lot of students. I have a sense of obligation to about 2,500, 2,600 students. We also have amazing graduate programs, including one in inclusive design. And that's just to give you a sense that at OCAD University, we live, breathe inclusive design in everything that we do. So even if you come and ask me for my business card, you will note that it is in Braille as well as printed. And when I've been at OCAD University for about 1 year and 4 months. But we have a new dean of grad studies, so I'm no longer the new dean anymore. And when I came, there was already this ethos of design for humanity. And so as part of the understanding of design for humanity, there was already an attention to universal design, inclusive design, because the institution was already in its DNA since the 1990s thinking about how we can design for the widest range of human diversities and abilities. But when I came, there were sort of two changes, I think, that we needed to take into account. The first change is that since the 1990s, everyone does design for humanity. Human-centered design is now the main philosophical underpinning of most design activities. And so that doesn't help you distinguish yourself from other institutions. And the second thing that was really important is which I will talk about more in depth, but the need to sort of engage with and intertwine our design practices with indigenous knowledge and indigenous knowledge systems. So we had design for humanity, but we needed a way to re-describe what it is that we were doing so that we can be inclusive of indigenous perspectives and again, distinguish the way in which we approach things in that inclusion. So literally 3 weeks after I arrived at OCAD University, we put together a World Cafe style workshop, because I work very sort of bottom up, on respectful design. And part of it was really trying to understand and answer 3 questions as a faculty. What did respectful design mean to people as individuals? what respectful design meant to each of our programs, both our graduate and undergraduate programs, and what respectful design meant to the faculty as a whole. Again, I have responsibility and responsiveness to about 100 full-time faculty and 150 sessional faculty, so we do not have a room large enough to include all of them. And so to make sure that the process was inclusive for those who could not participate, the outcomes of each session was to do short 10, 20, 30-second statements about what respectful design meant to me or the program or the faculty as a whole, so that we could share that with the wider community. And, you know, people held up signs and stuff so that you could see it and read it as well as hear it. So coming out of that, because we then produced a video that had really poor sound quality because we were doing it in a lecture room. The lighting was terrible, but having an amazing marketing and communication team, they worked with us to produce one that I'm going to share with you that conveys what all respectful design means to us. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we didn't go for a definition. That often, again, in sort of academic context, it's like, we're going to define respectful design as X. Again, part of being inclusive is to understand there are multiple ways to approach things and multiple perspectives. So focusing on meaning, it could have a different meaning for you and a different meaning for me, but it is actually it is the synthesis and the consensus around those multiple meanings that we then use to shape a range of definitions of what respectful design means. So here's what respectful design means to the Faculty of Design. At OCAD University Faculty of Design, we practice what we call respectful design. Respectful design, what does it mean to the Faculty of Design? It means valuing inclusivity and people's cultures and ways of knowing through empathetic and responsible creative methodologies.
It means deepening our...
I haven't stopped. At OCAD University Faculty of Design, we practice what we call respectful design. Respectful design, what does it mean to the Faculty of Design? It means valuing inclusivity and people's cultures and ways of knowing through empathetic and responsible creative methodologies.
It means deepening our...
It's gonna stop there. Okay, I'm gonna keep going forward, and then I'll just send you the YouTube link later. But really, some of the key messages is it has to do with, as she's sort of indicating, the relationships, right? The relationships that we have to one another, the relationships we have to the natural world, and even the relationship that we have to the supernatural world. And creating a context in which all of that, what we call sort of extreme inclusivity, right, affects the way in which we design as a process, as well as affects the outcomes of the designs that we produce, not for, but with everything that we have respect for because it exists in the universe. And so what I'm going to do is I only have time to take you through sort of two examples. One of them will be a student project that speaks to how we use, or in this particular case, the student used the digital as a way to remind us how we need to be inclusive. And the second example I'll show you is the way in which we use the digital to actually be inclusive. Give you the context, so this is a senior thesis project that was, the mentors for this particular project was Angelica Shisha-Ferres, who's the chair of the Industrial Design program, and Kobe Barhard, who's also in the Industrial Design program. And one of the things that's really important is we tend to not respect disciplinary boundaries. So this is actually a project that brings together graphic design, industrial design, and interaction design all together because, again, if you're being inclusive, it means there are multiple modalities of engagement that you have to do that cuts across specific disciplines. And so especially in, I think, our industrial design program, like those notions of disciplinary boundaries are completely erased. And it's the students who actually push us further in terms of erasing those boundaries, because they want to design for the solution, not for the discipline it comes from. So the work I'm going to talk to you about is called Now You See Me by Steinway. And this, as part of his thesis project, he wanted to address the lack of inclusion of Asian Canadians in the Canadian job market. So even though Asian Canadians make up about, I think, 15% of the population, especially I think here in Toronto, they oftentimes have difficulty getting their first interview or getting a job once they get past the interview because of, again, institutional racism in which they have not seen as being part of mainstream Canadian society. And so his work really seeks to challenge the assumptions around how an interviewee of Asian heritage is actually treated in the interviewing process. And so there's two things that he focused on. The first is what he called the Asian resume. And again, this it has a digital form of it, but it also exists in print. And what it actually does is that to be able to read the words there when you're standing kind of face to face, you have to do Asian eyes, right? So the gesture that is used by young kids and races to make fun of Asian people. And again, the work of really trying to figure out how to develop a typeface that only reveals itself when you make that gesture was a lot of work for him to be able to create. And so in the website that he created, you actually have to put in all your information and it will generate this Asian resume in a PDF that then you can use, again, to call attention to, are you being inclusive in your process of hiring? Are you requiring that they live up to a certain stereotype in order to engage in and contribute to Canadian society? So again, it's this idea of if conforming to prescriptive stereotypes helps me do the job, then this is what he will do. The second thing that he creates is the power suit. And hopefully this power suit, you'll be able to kind of see how it works in action. So in the power suit, there's this slouching mechanism. As the interviewee gets nervous, this triggers sensors, which then pushes the interviewee into a submissive position. For women, the suit is specialized that if, by generating the nervousness, it opens up to reveal the cleavage dealing with the over-sexualization of Asian women, right? And so as part of this process, again, using digital technology, sensors, and moving parts to, again, allow the suit to position the individual in such a way that reminds us again how non-inclusive Canadian society can be. So again, we focus on entrepreneurship. So if you go to his website, you will find that you will be able to print out an Asian resume for $30 or rent out the power suit starting at $100 depending on the modifications that you require to be made. But again, this is a reminder of how we fail at an inclusion. And again, this is our students grappling with the idea of what does it mean to be in an inclusive society. How can we design these processes so that I feel, as we spoken in the earlier presentation, I feel like I belong. Again, one of the things we talked about is respectful design means designing futures of inclusion and belonging for everyone and everything. And so I'm going to talk about, as I indicated before, we have an inclusive design research center that really, and I show, this is a screenshot of the controls that is actually on, that allows you to modify the web page itself so that you're able to adjust it to what is individually required for you for this site to be accessible to you. The work of the Inclusive Design Research Center is developing tools, processes, and technologies that is not about, meeting the 80%. It's not even about meeting the 20%. It's actually about that one-to-one. How do I adapt whatever that the user needs, wants, to the specificity of their multiple and complex identities so that they feel that they can use whatever tool or site or product that needs to be used. And by using that, they understand that they actually belong to whatever community that this experience is part of. One of the projects that they've been working on is the Social Justice Repair Kit. This is a international project of which the center only engages in one small part. And it's really focused, the part that we're really focused on is storytelling and the developing of a storytelling tool that is inclusive and that allows multiple modalities and multiple languages of storytelling among young people, because one of, again, the sense of feeling of belonging and feeling of inclusion is feeling that you can share and tell your story in the way in which you need to. So the interface is really simple, and it's meant to be simple because it makes it easier for whatever adaptive technologies that are necessary to use it, to be able to read it. It also, again, it's made for kids, so it needs to be simple enough for them to feel like they could use it as well. Again, in this, you have a choice of different languages, English, French, Canadian, Farsi, as well as Japanese. And that's just, again, there's a long list of other languages that are being developed as well to support the tool. But again, it's this ideal of being able to share your story, but also have that story translated so that you can listen to and engage with the stories of other young people. Again, tagging allows this to be easily searched. Adding images become important because images becomes another modality in which the stories can be told and shared. And again, being able to preview and translate, and the option of being able to save your story without sharing, right? So how do we, one of the challenges I think around the openness that we talk about technologies is that we also have to recognize when people do not feel it's comfortable or safe to be open, and thus allow them the agency to opt out of experiences but not lose the experience that they've created, right? And so the work that we're doing at OCAD University is tied to 7 principles that are in our academic plan. And I'm so excited. I've never thought that I would be in an institution where its #1 principle in its academic plan is decolonization. And then after that focuses on, diversity, equity, sustainability, valuing faculty, interdisciplinarity, and health and wellness. And I think talking about the principle of decolonization is really important because as I began this talk with the Indigenous Acknowledgement, that the first, one would say, the first exclusion that happened in the Canadian context is the exclusion of Indigenous people and Indigenous nations and Indigenous communities. And so until we are actively able to reintegrate or include those perspectives include those communities in the way that they self-define that they want to be in, then many of our efforts of inclusion will only serve to further exclude this first community, right? Form a real sense of belonging and a real sense of agency in the Canadian context. And again, understanding that this starts from, the very beginning, that it was not just a project of exclusion, but it was also a project of elimination. And design has a role in this. I mean, I'm at OCAD University, and all we talk about is the group of 7 painters. And when you go and you look at their work, a lot of it is the glorification of colonialism that happened, right? So, and this is, and it becomes really important because it actually becomes a source of trauma for our Indigenous students. Like at OCAD University, we have an Indigenous Visual Cultural Center. We're sort of building up, have consistently had strong numbers of Indigenous students who are engaging in our programs. And, when they come into Art History 101 or Design History 101, and this is the image that they see, and this is what we are explaining to them as what design needs and should be, then that excludes them from feeling like they can participate in design as a profession. And so there's a lot of stuff that we're doing, again, in order to be inclusive. Right now, I'm in massive hiring mode, where we've had an Indigenous cluster hire of 5 faculty open rank, open program that we are reading through applications for. In the faculty of design, I have 4 faculty positions in which Indigenous and racialized candidates will be prioritized. And so that's part of the inclusion, right? Bringing those perspectives into the institution itself so that they can be part of the transformation. Again, and that sets up our ability to transform our curriculum so that the baseline of understanding is Indigenous knowledge. And so we have faculty members now who are figuring out how do we define or redefine our design processes based on the 7 grandfather teachings? Or how do we tie sustainability into notions of 7 generations? And so that's kind of the process of curriculum transformation that we're going through. And again, the context for all of this, and I travel way too much, and I'm so happy to be in Canada right now because it affords a lot of possibilities that are not possible in places like further south. It's not possible yet in Australia, which is where I lived and worked before I came here. And the context around it is completely different, let's say, in Europe or in Asia. And so we're in a really amazing time right now in terms of, again, how the Canadian government and the Canadian people are responding to the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this makes respectful design possible. It makes inclusion, a true sense of inclusion possible. And it opens up, again, I think my 3 takeaways for this is hope. It opens up the possibility of hope that we can really create an inclusive society and use our digital tools not as a tool of exclusion, not as an acceleration of processes of decolonization, of colonization, but actually as a key part of this decolonization that is necessary for Canadian society, as well as being perhaps a beacon for the world itself. So I leave you with hope and our reminder of our invited guest status, and hopefully a call for you to join us at OCAD University in respectful design. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
We just have time for 1 or 2 questions. I like the final question. What do respectful design and inclusive design differ? Or do they?
Well, I say, to the extent I think sometimes that the language of inclusive design focuses on differences and diversity among humans, respectful design affords that same kind of respect to all other living creatures as well. So it's that the same processes by which you would use to consider how do you design for different cognitive differences or physical differences. Like, what does it mean to design let's say, an environment that is just as much cat and dog friendly as it is human friendly? And understand, like, let's say, the animal world and the mineral world as actually different cognitive possibilities. And then how do you do extreme innovation, to a certain extent, to design a set of solutions that is inclusive of their perspectives, as well as the sort of the diversity of human perspectives.
Excellent. How do you acknowledge and represent the intersection between respectful design and the regulatory guidelines related to the Disability Act and all of those acronyms that I don't know what they stand for?
I mean, again, OCAD University has had a really long history of, Yuta and our faculty, she's helped write a lot of these guidelines, right? So for us, that the guidelines are just like, that's like step zero, right? What we're trying to figure out is how do we expand the notions of inclusivity, because the guidelines generally represent the most conservative, and it represents the kind of the most, in some ways, generic and non-specific aspects of things of what you can do. And we want to be, and some of us at OCAD are even further beyond that in terms of what our notions of inclusion mean, and again, the possibilities that it creates for us of innovation. So we're having, one of my faculty mentors, Peter Koppen, he's working with a student who is blind to figure out how do we do data visualization that's actually not visual, that's sonic, right? And that's, those are the kind of innovations that push beyond what the guidelines require at the moment.
Excellent. We'll just take one question from the room. Yeah, right at the back.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how OCAD went through the process of becoming an inclusive organization, and maybe some of the challenges you faced and how you overcame them.
I guess all of these processes are processes of culture change, and so there's two ways in which change can kind of happen. There's a lot of change that happens just from the community itself, right? So the bottom-up aspect of it. Inclusive design and respectful design, like I said, it's already been part of the DNA of the institution. It may not have been articulated in a very strong way, or we may not have had the institutional structures or resources to be able to support them. But I guess people like myself, right, who are coming in or have come in, what their role has been to help accelerate, I think, these processes is just remove the institutional barriers. If it's I'm on the academic policy committee, so if there's, we're going through the process right now, let's say, of rewriting all of our policies to make sure that it's gender neutral, right? Or that we don't have ableist language in there. And so part of it is really having already an ethos that is part of the environment. This is really hard to do if there's not already kind of a grassroots discussion and discourse that's already been built. Generating that, I think, is incredibly require amount of energy, right? I'm really lucky at OCAD that those discussions have been happening for a long time. It's just getting the right people in place to sort of say, let's change the policy Let's find the resources to be able to support the things that the community is already wanting to do, and making sure that when there is anxiety, because a lot of the blockage that happens at that level is people feeling anxiety about their ability to adapt to the changes, then making sure that we're creating a language, a shared language by which people can talk about the change that is happening, but also their feelings about it. Adequate resources is really important, and giving people that sense of support, and being optimistic that things are possible. I always say what's great about being a designer is that you create the conditions of possibility, the things that people can't imagine, and it's your job actually to make real and tangible the things that people have not been able to imagine before. And so these processes is the same approach, right? Our job is through language and visualization and videos that do work to create the conditions of possibility so that people can see and believe and work towards making the change happen.
Excellent. Please join me in thanking Dori for her time.